The first time the queen touched me, it wasn't gentle. It wasn't romantic either, at least not the way stories like to lie about queens and commoners and fate. It was a grip. A hard, urgent clamp around my forearm that stopped me mid-step like I'd walked into an invisible wall. My breath hitched, my eyes snapped up. And there she was, not a rumor, not a hologram above some parade, not a painted face on a coin or a screen, her. The Queen of Astorvay, Empress of the Starfold, Keeper of the Treaty Rings, the woman who could sign a single document and make a planet breathe easier or choke in silence. She was seated among a sea of nobles in the council hall, draped in midnight silk that looked like it had been poured over her shoulders, a crown that didn't glitter so much as listen. Around her, courtiers held themselves like statues, pretending not to watch her breathe. And she was watching me. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that aisle, not in that row, not in that hall at all. I was just looking for an empty seat. Her fingers tightened. "Sit beside me," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sentence landed like a gavel on stone, and the entire hall seemed to exhale at once, sharp, startled, afraid. Every head turned. Every pair of eyes found me. And for one terrifying second, all I could think was, I'm about to die in a room full of people who will pretend they didn't see it. My mouth went dry, my knees did something unhelpful. I tried to speak. No sound came out. The queen's gaze didn't soften, but it shifted fractionally. As if she'd measured my panic and found it ordinary, forgivable. Her grip eased just enough to remind me it could tighten again. Beside her, an attendant, a tall aster with skin like polished bronze, leaned close, lips parting to protest. The queen lifted one finger. The attendant froze and stepped back. That single motion carried more force than a shouted command. It was the kind of authority you couldn't argue with because it didn't live in volume. It lived in inevitability. I swallowed. My legs finally remembered how to move. I slid into the seat beside her. The chair felt wrong under me, too close, too visible, too important. The armrest brushed my elbow. The queen's sleeve hovered inches from my hand. Her perfume, or whatever asters used instead of perfume, was faint and cold like rain on metal. No one spoke, not to me, not to her. Silence in that hall was not emptiness. It was a living thing with teeth. On the raised platform, Chancellor Varen continued reading from a crystal slate, voice steady as a metronome. He didn't pause, he didn't dare. And thus the proposals of House Kareth are submitted for the Third Ring's vote. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape through my sternum. I kept my eyes forward. That was instinct, not strategy. In the military, you learned that when someone powerful singled you out, you didn't give the room the satisfaction of watching you squirm. But I could feel them, hundreds of gazes like needles, a human, in the inner ring, in the queen's row, in the queen's shadow. The last time a human had been invited into that hall, we'd come under a flag of truce and left under a reign of silent contempt. It had taken 10 years, 3 border skirmishes, and one nearly catastrophic accident in orbit to get us back into the same room without drawing blood. And now, here I was, seated like an honored guest, when I hadn't even been sure I'd find a chair. I was here because someone in the embassy had told me to attend as a cultural observer. A fancy way of saying, stand in the back, take notes, don't talk. I wasn't a diplomat, I wasn't noble, I wasn't even important. I was a logistics officer with a patched jacket and a face the universe forgot 5 seconds after seeing it. I was the kind of person who did not get grabbed by queens. I risked a glance. The queen stared forward, composed as carved marble, hands folded on her lap. Her nails were short, practical, an odd detail on a woman wrapped in ceremony. Her posture wasn't stiff, it was contained like a blade in a sheath. Then without moving her head, she spoke again, quietly, for me alone. "Do not look at them," she murmured. "They will decide what you are from your fear." My throat bobbed. I forced my gaze back to the dais. "They're already deciding," I whispered. A pause, a breath. "Let them," she said. "They are often wrong." I didn't know what to do with that. The debate rolled on. House Kareth proposed a tariff shift on the outer lanes, an economic squeeze disguised as a security adjustment. House Valen countered with numbers, ledgers, and the polite venom of someone who'd enjoyed power too long. The council spoke in circles the way old empires always did, never naming hunger, never naming fear, never admitting that their laws were just weapons with better etiquette. I tried to follow, but my brain kept snagging on one question: why me? The queen had to know what this looked like. The hall would digest it into rumor within minutes. A human sitting at her side would become a story before it became a fact, and stories were dangerous here. I shifted slightly, and the queen's sleeve brushed my wrist. Her eyes flicked to me, just a glance, sharp and assessing. You are trembling, she said, not accusing, observing. I'm fine, I lied. You are not, she replied. But you are here. Something in me tightened, not with fear this time, but with a familiar stubbornness. Yes, I said, I'm here. The queen's mouth quirked just barely, the hint of a smile quickly buried. Good, she whispered. Stay that way. A shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the hall's cold air. The chancellor's voice rose. The third ring will now cast their vote. A soft chime rippled through the chamber as the ring nobles activated their signets. Lights shimmered across the floor like a web of tiny stars. The queen did not cast a signet. She didn't need to. Her vote carried its own gravity. The council was theater, she was the script. But today she was letting the play run, and I was seated close enough to hear the actors swallow. The votes resolved. House Kareth's proposal passed by a narrow margin. A murmur swept through the room. Satisfaction on one side, disgust on the other, calculations behind every smile. The chancellor bowed. By the council's will, it shall be enacted at the next cycle. Before he could finish, the queen lifted her hand. The chancellor stopped mid-breath like he'd been unplugged. The room went dead quiet. The queen rose. I rose too, purely because my body remembered that you stood when the person with the power to end you stood. Her gaze swept the hall. It wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. House Kareth, she said, voice carrying without effort. You speak often of security. Lord Kareth and Aster with elaborate shoulder plates and a smile too polished bowed. Your Majesty, we are devoted to the stability of the lanes. The Queen's eyes held his. Stability, she repeated, the word sounded different in her mouth, sharper, and yet you propose a measure that will starve the outer stations of medical shipments within a week. A ripple of unease, Lord Kareth's smile tightened. The tariffs are numbers, the Queen said. I have seen them. Lord Kareth's throat worked. Tell me, the Queen continued, how many children on Station Varda will go without breath filters when you adjust the lanes? A silence that was not empty but hunted. Your Majesty, the stations are not the Council's responsibility. A soft sound, almost a laugh, touched the Queen's lips. Not your responsibility, she echoed. Then what precisely is your purpose? Lord Kareth straightened, a flush creeping under his bronze-toned skin. We govern the lanes. You govern profits, the Queen corrected, and you do so with your hands clean of consequence. Her gaze shifted, and every noble tensed as if hoping she wouldn't land on them next. Then her eyes returned to Lord Kareth. You would strangle the outer stations to tighten your grip on the inner ring, she said, and you assumed I would not interfere because the council voted. Lord Kareth's jaw clenched. The council's will is not a shield, the Queen said, and her voice dropped not in volume but in temperature. It is a mirror, and today it reflects your ugliness. A collective inhale. Then the Queen turned slightly toward me. My blood went cold. I had the sudden, vivid certainty that my name was about to become a weapon. The Queen's hand extended, palm up. Not a command this time, an invitation. My muscles locked. My mind scrambled for the correct response protocol for Queen offers hand in council hall while everyone watches. There wasn't one. I looked at her fingers, steady, unadorned, waiting. My hand lifted slowly like it belonged to someone else, and I placed it in hers. Her grip closed, not crushing, not gentle, firm, certain. The room made a sound like 100 throats swallowing at once. The Queen raised our joined hands just enough to make the message unmistakable. This, she said, is my witness. Lord Kareth's eyes snapped to me, and for a heartbeat his expression wasn't political. It was predatory, like he'd seen a weak spot in armor. A human, he spat, unable to keep the contempt from his voice. Your Majesty insults the ring, I elevate truth, the Queen said. Then she looked at me again. Tell them, she murmured, softly enough that only I heard. My lungs forgot their job. I stared forward, eyes wide. Tell them what? I whispered. The Queen's expression didn't change, but there was something in her gaze now, an edge of urgency that hadn't been there before. The air, she said. The station, the children. My brain stumbled. Then it clicked. I knew Station Varda, not from a map, from a smell, from the tang of recycled oxygen that never quite hid the mildew in the vents, from the way the lights flickered when power ran thin, from the quiet panic in the eyes of nurses counting filters like prayers. I'd been there 6 months ago. Not as a diplomat, not as a hero, as a delivery officer, a shipment run that had been delayed at customs until people started coughing blood. I'd watched a doctor hold a small child while their lungs fought and lost. I'd watched parents argue with machines that didn't care. I'd filed reports. I'd shouted at supervisors. I'd threatened people with regulations. It hadn't mattered, until now my throat burned. Every eye in the chamber drilled into me, some curious, some hostile, some hungry for spectacle. I could stay silent. I could pretend I didn't understand. I could let the queen carry the moment alone, but her hand held mine like an anchor, and the memory of Station Varda rose in me like a tide. I stood. The sound of my chair scraping the floor was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I didn't have a signet. I didn't have a title. All I had was my voice. My name is Elias Mar, I said, and the hall flinched at the bluntness of it. A human name spoken in the heart of Aster Power. Logistics Corps Terran Coalition, murmurs I swallowed, forcing the words through my dry mouth. I delivered medical supplies to Station Varda in the last cycle, I continued. Your security adjustments already delay shipments by days. When you increase tariffs, you won't just make it expensive, you'll make it impossible. Lord Kareth sneered. Human exaggeration. I turned my head, meeting his gaze. I watched a 7-year-old suffocate because the clinic ran out of filters, I said, and my voice didn't shake. Her mother tried to rinse the old ones and reuse them until they tore. The doctor gave the last filter to a baby because she had to choose who got to breathe. The room went so quiet it felt like the air had been sucked away. My hands curled into fists at my sides. I don't know your noble games, I said, but I know math, I know delays. I know what happens when you stack minor inconveniences on top of each other until the outer stations collapse. A noble in the second row hissed something under her breath. Lord Kareth's expression hardened. This is enough, the queen said, not loud, not dramatic, just final. Lord Kareth shut his mouth like a door slamming. The queen released my hand, and for a moment I felt the loss of it like cold water. Then she faced the hall again. You have heard, she said, not a rumor. Not a projection, a witness who has stood where you will never stand. Her gaze sharpened. The council's vote will be amended, she declared. Tariffs will be suspended for medical shipments to the outer stations. Any house that interferes will lose their lane privileges for one cycle. A collective gasp. Lord Kareth lurched forward. Your Majesty, this is not within. The queen's eyes snapped to him, and the temperature of the room dropped again. It is within me, she said. Chancellor's hands trembled as he bowed. As you command, your majesty. And like that, the councils will bend, not because the queen forced it, but because she made it undeniable. She sat back down. I sat too because my legs decided they'd done enough for one lifetime. My heart pounded so hard I tasted metal. The debate resumed, but the room was altered. The nobles spoke carefully now, measuring each phrase against the memory of a human voice describing a dying child. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exposed and afraid, because Lord Kareth's gaze kept sliding toward me, promise sharp and patient, as if he'd just found a new target. Minutes crawled by. The council moved on to trade routes and fleet allocations, but my mind stayed locked on the queen's words. This is my witness. She hadn't chosen me because I was special. She'd chosen me because I was inconvenient, because I'd seen something that made their lies harder to maintain. Because I was living proof that the outer stations were not abstract, I leaned slightly toward her, keeping my voice low. Why did you pick me? I asked. The queen's eyes stayed on the dais, but her mouth moved. Because you were looking for an empty seat, she whispered. I blinked. That's not an answer. It is, she said. You were searching for a place you did not believe you deserved. You thought the hall had no room for you. My throat tightened. And, I whispered. And that is what they do to worlds, she said quietly. Convince them there is no room, that the center belongs to others. I stared forward, but her words landed somewhere deep. The queen's tone shifted, almost softer. You came anyway, she murmured, even when you were unwelcome. I didn't know how to respond. So, she continued, I made you seen. A chill slid down my spine again, but this time it wasn't fear, it was understanding. The queen wasn't just punishing House Kareth. She was changing the shape of the room. A human beside her made the inner ring look less absolute. It made the idea of outsiders less stable. It made everyone uncomfortable. That discomfort was the point. Hours later, the session ended. Nobles rose like a flock of expensive birds. Conversations sparked in low voices, glances thrown like knives. I stood too, intending to slip away, to vanish back into the anonymous corridors where people like me belonged. A hand touched my sleeve. Not the queen's this time, an attendant. Your Majesty requests you remain, she said, tone perfectly neutral. My stomach dropped. I turned back. The queen remained seated, calm amid the swirl of departing power. Her gaze held me. For a moment she looked tired, not physically, not weak, just burdened, like she carried the weight of every decision and felt its bruise. When the hall finally cleared, the queen rose and walked toward a side door that led into the private chambers. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. I followed because when a queen grabs your arm and says, "Sit beside me," you learn quickly that your life is no longer entirely yours. The corridor beyond the chamber was quieter, lined with carved stone and soft light. Guards stood at intervals, tall, armed, unreadable. We entered a smaller room, a consultation chamber with a single table and a panoramic window that overlooked the city's floating districts. Outside, Astervae glittered like a necklace of light around the curve of the planet. The queen dismissed her attendants with a glance. The door sealed, silence settled, and suddenly the air felt different, less ceremonial, more real. The queen turned to me, up close. Her eyes weren't just dark, they were layered like storm clouds that had learned patience. "You spoke well," she said. My laugh came out rough. "I spoke like someone who's about to be executed." The queen's mouth twitched. "If I wished you dead, Officer Mar, you would not have sat at my side." "That's comforting," I muttered, then regretted it immediately. To my surprise, the queen's expression didn't harden. Instead, she regarded me with something almost like amusement. "Humans," she said softly, "even when terrified, you still attempt humor." "It's a coping mechanism," I said. "A useful one," she replied, then her face sobered. "House Kareth will not forget what happened today," she said. "I noticed," I said, thinking of that predatory stare. The queen nodded once as if confirming a calculation. "They will come for you," she said simply. My stomach tightened. "Because I embarrassed them. Because you endangered them," she corrected. "You made their cruelty visible," I swallowed. "So why put me in that position?" The queen held my gaze. "Because they have been strangling my empire slowly," she said, voice quiet but sharp. "They do it with votes and tariffs and polite words. They do it in ways that allow them to claim innocence." She stepped toward the window, looking out at the floating districts. "I can order them stopped," she continued. "I can crush them with force." She turned back to me, eyes steady. "But force creates martyrs," she said, "and martyrs create wars." My throat went dry. "So you used me," I said. The queen didn't flinch. "Yes," she said, "I did." The honesty hit harder than any excuse would have. Then she added without softening it, "And you used me." I blinked. "What? You came to my hall," she said. "You sat beside me, you spoke your truth under my protection, you forced my hand." My mouth opened, then closed. "I didn't," I started. "You did," the queen said, not accusing, just stating. "And it worked." I exhaled slowly. The room felt too big for my heartbeat. "What happens now?" I asked. The queen watched me a moment longer than necessary, then she spoke carefully. "Now," she said, "you will leave this palace alive. You will return to your embassy, and you will pretend you are not afraid." I let out a humorless breath. "That's going to be difficult." "Good," she said. "Fear keeps you honest." She moved back toward the table, and for the first time I saw something on it, an object I hadn't noticed earlier, a small ring, not a signet, not an ornament, a plain band of dark metal with a subtle shifting sheen. The queen picked it up and held it out. My skin prickled. "I can't accept that." "It is not a gift," she said. "It is a shield." I stared at it. "What is it?" "A marker," she said. "A declaration that you are under my protection." My stomach lurched. "That will make them hate me more." The queen's eyes narrowed. "They already will." I didn't reach for the ring. The queen's gaze softened just barely, like the edge of winter melting for a second. "You spoke for children you do not know," she said quietly. "You did so in a hall that wanted you silent." Her voice lowered. "That kind of courage is rare," she said. "Do not waste it by dying foolishly." I swallowed hard. I took the ring. It was cold, heavier than it looked. When I slid it onto my finger, a faint pulse ran through it like a heartbeat matching mine. It settled there as if it had always belonged. The queen watched. Then she inclined her head, formal again. "Go," she said. I hesitated. "What?" she asked. I didn't know how to say the words that sat in my chest like a stone, so I said the simplest truth. "Thank you," I said. The queen's eyes held mine. "Do not thank me," she replied. "Thank the child who could not breathe. She bought you this moment with her last air." My throat tightened painfully. I nodded once because anything more would break me. The guards escorted me through side corridors back toward the embassy gates. The palace behind me was as beautiful as it was dangerous, an artwork made of power, carved into stone and protocol. As I walked, I could feel the ring's weight on my finger, a constant reminder that I had been seen, that I had been used, that I had for a brief moment been placed at the center of an empire's gaze. Outside, the city hummed. The sky was full of traffic, ships gliding like silent birds between floating districts. I tried to breathe normally. I tried to look like someone who belonged, but I could still feel the queen's hand on my arm, not just the grip, the intention behind it. She hadn't pulled me into her row because she needed company. She de-pulled me into her row because empires didn't change from the edges. They changed when someone dragged the truth into the center and forced everyone to look. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was part of that. As I crossed the threshold into the embassy's protected zone, my comm unit buzzed. A message. No sender ID, just one line of text. You should have STAYED in the back. I stared at it. My pulse quickened. Then slowly I lifted my hand and looked at the ring. The dark metal shimmered faintly, catching the light like a promise. I deleted the message, and I kept walking, because I remembered what the Queen had said, and for once I believed it. Stay that way. And somewhere out in the outer stations, in a clinic that smelled like old air and hope, a shipment would arrive on time, not because the Council had grown kind, but because a queen had grabbed a human's arm and a human had refused to stay invisible. And that quiet, stubborn, dangerously contagious was how worlds began to change.